A brownfield is an underutilized or vacant property that has or is perceived to have hazardous or contaminant material on it. It can be anything from an industrial park to an old gas station site, dry cleaner site, even just a vacant site that may be eligible for reuse, and you want to make sure that it's not have any contaminants or hazardous material. My name is Cheryl Gonzalez. I'm a senior brownfield consultant for the Center for Creative Land Recycling. Rural communities, they don't always have the resources that urban communities have. So more important than ever is that you have relationships that have built trust and promotes the collaboration and partnership. And those partnerships and collaboration help them to build capacity so that they could pivot the site out of a brownfield into a reuse. Gardnerville Station was really important to that community because they had memories associated with their childhood. It's updated and it's become a community use for community meetings for the entire community, and it's no longer an eyesore.
This site was built in the late 30s, early 40s as a gas station, and it was one of the few gas stations that travelers could have between LA and driving through the 395 up north. So in its location, it became quite popular and then became kind of a little hub of the community. I am Jen Nalder, and I am with Main Street Gardnerville. A lot of the old timers and the old time families who are still here, a lot of them have really great memories of this actual site.
So a lot of people see that we've repurposed the building and changed the building, and they think that that was the driving force behind Gardnerville seeking after these brownfield grants. But the real reason is we wanted to address stormwater. Eric Nilsson, and I am the town manager of the town of Gardnerville. The area of the highway where we are is called the S-curve. The S-curve is very flat, and during larger rain events, there's no place for the stormwater to go. In addition, there's some semi-blighted properties in this area that the town hopes will be available for redevelopment in the future. And we wanted to take the stormwater burden off those properties. So originally, there were 3 underground fuel reservoirs which had long since lost their ability to be fluid tight. There was significant amounts of petroleum in the soils underneath the station, and even had expanded outside the property limits. So after the underground fuel tanks were removed, the town installed a 13,000 cubic foot storm drain reservoir. The approximate limits are this first manhole here, and then you can see a second manhole approximately where those 2 workers are standing. So that's going to drain from the highway, then pumps the water out down Mission Street out to the Martin Slough where it drains.
Preservation is essential for many reasons. Most of the buildings that we have here in our district, and we're losing them, are some of the original structures that were built when this town was founded. And so with that becomes stories of generations as to what brought them here, how they were founded, and the families that have come through them in order for them to stay and then keep us going. And so being able to have access to test those sites, remediate those sites, remove the contaminants, and still preserve your structure is really essential with the Brownfield program.
Carson City, I think, originally became a city in 1858, and the original structure that was on this property was built in 1859. So this corner in Carson City has always been a historic watering hole, a place for people to meet and greet each other. I'm Bill Miles, and I'm here representing the Nevada Builders Alliance. I'm also representing the Northern Nevada Development Authority. This building is on the National Historic Register and was owned by a group that thought it needed to be torn down. We saw it as an opportunity to buy the structure, restore it, as we knew that it could be saved, and we would hopefully again establish a place where legislatures could meet and possibly bridge the aisle and have some informal discussions about what's best for business in the state of Nevada.
It was in rough shape. The roof structure was pretty well collapsed. The only residents here that seemed to appreciate what was going on in here were pigeons. So it took quite a while to convince them to move elsewhere. But aside from the exterior walls, which have some character, the inside was essentially gone. I'm Jim Fazer. I'm the 2023 board president for the Nevada Builders Alliance, and I'm also a project manager with Miles Construction. In the construction industry, primary concern is always safety. So, getting with the architects, getting with the engineers, figuring out how we could come up with a plan that not only was going to retain the historical integrity of the building, but also something that was safe for the workers to be in here to kind of resurrect the structure. The history of the building and a lot of those types of products, lead, asbestos, were starting to kind of come more into use into the late 50s, early 60s. So not to the extent of some buildings, but yeah, there was enough that we had to be mindful. So what you see in this facility today is essentially a new building with inside the old structure.
Sierra Institute was a great project where they took a burn scar area and created opportunity to develop homes, a workforce development program around those homes.
At one time, this valley had 11 operating mills. This is critically a wood basket for the state of California. The challenge when losing a major employer is particularly acute in a place like this because there aren't a lot of other opportunities that folks might be able to just sink into. So it is important in maintaining those businesses and the opportunities that we have. And it's a really painful thing to watch as young families, future leaders are leaving an area. And that's part of the dynamic or the challenge that so many rural areas face, which is why repurposing, revitalizing old sites is really important. My name is Jonathan Cusel. I direct the Sierra Institute for Community and Environment. The Sierra Institute recognized the need for utilization of material from our woods to help reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire. We also realized that we didn't have the number of jobs that we needed here, and we thought trying to rebuild this economy through the creation of wood utilization businesses was a great way to both provide jobs and address some of the environmental stewardship needs that we had in this area. So we looked around and identified this 28-acre site, and we said this would be an ideal site because it was a wood campus, it was a giant sawmill for many years. Who knew that 2.5 years ago we'd actually be dealing with one of the largest fires in the state's history, the Dixie Fire, which consumed close to 1 million acres. And it burned much of the town of Greenville, which is the major town center in this valley. So it is important that we treat these forests. It's important that we have businesses that can utilize this material that allows us to create the circular or regenerative economy. Having worked through a couple of Brownfields grants and having remediated a good portion of the site, it became an ideal location to take in burned logs and to take in some of the concrete from the homes and structures that were burned in the Dixie Fire. So this became a site to actually recycle, reuse material, as well as take burned trees and mill them so that wood can be used for rebuilding.
It's also an opportunity to revitalize lands that have been sitting vacant and put them to good use, to supporting the local communities, bringing in jobs. Danielle Berry, I am the Stewardship Project Manager for Sierra Institute for Community and Environment. It's a critical component in both our community revitalization and landscape restoration, and brownfield sites are an opportunity to connect those two pieces.
With the Reno Sparks Indian Colony, the benefit to the community there was they were able to address economic development for a community that was economically depressed. With the Walmart, Three Nations Walmart Plaza, they were able to contribute tremendously to the area, but more importantly, they contributed to the revenue needed for the Reno Sparks Indian Colony for all their services that they provide.
Reality is it's all Indian country. and that we all have a connection to all of the land, whether it's in the city or rural. My name is Bethany Sam. I work for Reno Sparks Indian Colony as the Public Relations Officer. The Reno Sparks Indian Colony represents 3 Great Basin tribes, which are the Paiute, Washoe, and Shoshone tribes. We're the original caretakers of these lands. The government built an industrial area around the tribes, which did have environmental inequities, and Brownfield will be able to help clean up these areas to turn them into something that'll be beneficial for the tribe. In 1994, the tribe had looked at this area as an economic development site. So they knew that being here in a prime area, they could definitely benefit from building some type of retail business to help make money for the tribe itself. This site was used for commercial and industrial uses. It used to have a commercial print shop, machine shops, auto repair shops, and sheet metal fabrication factory. It had hazardous contents here. There was an explosion where a lot of those chemicals were leaked into the ground here.
Common barriers for all of these projects would have been funding. Without the collaboration and the partnerships, the relationships all of them had built ahead of time, these projects would have not been able to be successfully realized. And again, because they're in rural communities, capacity and financial resources are really a barrier to getting a project like that done.
The Brownfield funding is a great resource for not only municipalities, counties, and property owners, but for everybody around. When people think of brownfields, they don't realize that it could just be a perception of contamination at some point. It doesn't have to be known contamination. Amy Barnes, Director of Business Development for Northern Nevada Development Authority. A lot of times, a lot of the brownfield projects are started just because the county had seen that there's an opportunity for some reuse and knew of some contaminations that had been used here before. So we were able to partner with the community itself to utilize the funding. Northern Nevada Development Authority has had 4 successful brownfield grants. We partner really closely with our communities that we work in to help determine how to use our funds to better that community as a whole and help bring their vision into fruition. Because we serve such a vast rural area encompassing 5 different counties, the need of each community is different. And so we are able to utilize the grants in different ways, all centered around economic development, which could come as a big industrial the possibility of a big industrial park, as well as helping main streets such as this.
The NNDA, in working with the, again, federal EPA, noticed the Brownfield grant program that we were able to make the connections with and were able to use for public and nonprofit projects that would benefit the rural communities that are all associated with the NNDA.
Brownfield comes into play because over the time, the materials used aren't very environmentally friendly or healthy, and we do have alternatives that could be a solution for that. Being able to preserve the building and not just look at it and say, well, we've got all these contaminants, let's just razor it and start over. Now we have opportunities of, now we have this great building, and now we have ways to remove the contaminants and preserve the building and then continue to still use it. Making sure that we have the resources lined up for those property owners to preserve their buildings is also really a high priority and essential. Projects like this are very successful when you apply what would be considered layering funding, finding different opportunities, and also they're not possible unless you have the buy-in of the community and the community support. So making sure that your communities come together and are part of the vision of what you have for this proposed site is really what helps to make it very successful.
We've harnessed quite a bit of resources. So we did use the Brownfields grant to remediate the soil, to remove the underground storage tanks, We used a community development block grant to improve this building, to bring it up to current building codes. And then we actually obtained a grant from NV Energy to purchase electric car charging stations, which are now located outside of this station. And when we finally finish up the site improvements of this property in the next year or two, the anticipation is to move the electric car chargers out to where the pumps used to be, the gas pumps, essentially replacing a petroleum product now with an electric car charger. So at least those 3 grants, and we hope to apply for a community development block grant again to finish the site improvements. So without the availability of outside funding, it would be very unlikely the town of Gardnerville would have been able to take on a project of this magnitude.
Many folks that are interested in our work out here have talked to us about it seems like it's overwhelming. It's a contaminated site. It's many acres. It's very expensive. But to that, there are plenty of resources from Center for Creative Land Recycling and EPA to help navigate those processes. There's organizations like Sierra Institute that are more than willing to share the lessons we learned here and help folks navigate that process. And believe it or not, there are numerous individuals within these rural communities that have the skill sets that you need to carry out a project like this.
The tribe used its relationships with Washoe County, the city of Reno, Truckee River Watershed Project to be able to pull funding from each one of those agencies to do the cleanup at this Walmart site.
The Sierra Institute could not have done the revitalization of this site without Brownfields' assistance. It also wouldn't have done this work, or likely wouldn't have done this work, without the Center for Creative Land Recycling and the assistance they provided to help identify the pathway through securing Brownfields grants.
This was a really neat project for Main Street as far as repurposing of old spaces. From the time that this project began and its completion or near completion, we've had other projects that have popped up through private owners in the district of repurposing old spaces. We have a warehouse down the road that was a warehouse recommended to be torn down because there was no use for it. And the owners of the property actually have converted it to an event space where they host weddings. And so understanding that there is other purposes for a building rather than just tearing them down, this has really been a great inspiration for that.
Using the Brownfields project shows that, even though some of these areas might not be desirable enough to put a business or clean up an area to have economic development, Brownfield will be able to help to clean up these areas to provide an economic base for tribes in the future.
Number one, it saved a historic structure on Main Street that a lot of people really cared about. And I can tell you, I've done a lot of projects in a 40+ year career in construction, and I've got more comments and positive comments on this building than anything. Now, granted, it did take a couple of years and our signs were here for quite a while, but the end result has just been nothing but positive comments from the community. You always have to be thinking outside the box. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do and get done, but if you have a vision and you have the right partners, literally almost anything can be done.
Folks would drive in as the mill was being constructed, and as the folks who were working on it, what they said is they would laugh, they would cry, and they would do both, because what it signified was that we can recover from the Dixie Fire. And the Brownfield remediation was the foundation for that recovery, recovering a land site and its use, and recovering opportunity for the community.